Hey kids, welcome to Stylus Rumble! I hauled the fairy rig out of mothballs. It's been like a year maybe since I was last working on this. So I spent some time looking at what I'd done already, because it's just like picking up a rig somebody else has started once it's been this long, and I didn't really remember what was going on. And I'm just gonna move on from here and do some more stuff. I drew in some little boots she has now, and her hair, which partially has been rigged already. So I hope you're not real sad about that. Each of these pieces, they're basically just, they've been drawn in the poses they need. I followed the same method I did for the eye, where I'd go along and I'd animate it as close as I could into place, and then when it wouldn't conform to the shape I needed it to, then I'd put in a drawing substitution as was necessary. So I did all these front pieces. There's still a little bit of leveling. Like here we have like an awkward chunk of hair we gotta deal with. We gotta find a better way to deal with that because it's ugly. These little things, they're just one drawing that's circling around because it looks fine, just circling around. And these as well have been animated into place. And then when the drawing doesn't work out, a new drawing has been added. I think I need a drawing for... don't know how I feel about that little transition there. That's something we can work on. But I only had the 3/4 front view of the hair, and instead of doing a rotation on a clean character and then rigging it, I just rigged it directly into the hair because it's my design, so why do things twice? Normally you'd have to find ways of breaking it up and stuff, but we still have to deal with this part of the hair. I did just clean that up as like a regular rotation, and I want to add some black outlines. It doesn't have any outlines, so I've been thinking of different ways I could do that. I don't want internal lines in the hair, so that's something we're going to deal with. We may actually just use, like, do I want to put an outline in there? There's ways to deal with that, so we'll deal with it when we get there. I'm not going to muck around with the hair today, I don't think. So what I'm going to do today is go through and do the rotation of some of these pieces, like chest and neck. That's my next piece. So I'm just going to turn some stuff off that I don't need to see. Let's turn off the arms. This, of course, is the art itself. So let's put this over here in the red so we can see it. I've already done the head. And as you can see, when you do a 360 head, I think people think it's just going to work real good. But these are flat shapes that are being like rotated around in like a fakey way. So, like, the Z information on this mouth is going to have to be fixed. But you're going to get stuff like this, and there's no way around it. You cannot have a two-dimensional image that rotates in the same way a three-dimensional image does. So once we get the whole rig done, what we're going to do is pose out our head in all the different shapes that we're going to need, like the up, down, left, right, start, A, B, start stuff. And then we can use our master controller to get that stuff set up. But there's gonna be, this happens. This is okay. You're not doing it wrong. This is a part of 2D life, okay? So let me think. I feel like I did the chest and then somehow managed to delete everything. I haven't gone back and watched all the videos of the rig I did, but I feel like that happened. So let's get rid of some of these detail bits. Boobs are details. Straps. This one's gonna be the most boring of all of them because when you're rigging as you go, you kind of get into a flow. But now that I've like just completely neglected this for a long time, there's no flow. Oh, there's a really good feature in 16, you guys. This lock now locks things for realsies. Like if you go down here, all of this is locked, so I cannot drag these things on the timeline. Isn't that just the best? Effects animators are gonna know what I'm talking about because animators break the sprites all the time. Now they can't do it. I'm so happy about that. So let's get this stuff into place. So I've gone through on the art. Let me sneak back down here. So these green circles are giving me the pivot point as they're being rotated around because I'm gonna have to animate them into place, like the arms and neck and stuff, as things go along. And the chest, the circle, this part here, so as they move around, the pivot point is going to have to change so that they still line up properly. So I just went through and on my overlay layer, I put in where I wanted those things to rotate as they went around. You could do the hips as well, but because this character's hips are hidden, I have a little bit more freedom there about where the actual pivot point is. It isn't as crucial as these other ones because these have to line up with the shoulders. So the pivot point position is going to be pretty important. Say that 3 times fast. Yeah. Okay, we'll lock this again. A lock. Okay, so as I'm selecting these, it's important to notice that I'm selecting the top piece, but then I'm hitting B, B, B until I get up to my arm master here. It's very important, especially for riggers, to know exactly where you've positioned your information. If you start animating on subpegs as you're rigging a character, you are going to F up everything that you're doing. So be very conscious. You always want to be looking in here to make sure that you're on the position you want to be on. You want to start as high on the hierarchy as you can. So here I'm affecting the shoulders. I can't shrink the entire shoulder apparatus. That's not going to be helpful. So the lowest place I can go is just going to be this shoulder pivot here. We're going to have to hide the artwork and make sure that these things line up just as well as they need to afterwards. But we can get pretty close here. See, because I think this down here is the actual art of the shoulder, and we want to make sure that our ring is being preserved here. Let's drag this up with us. B, 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 B. So here I'm doing the entire chest again, and you can see that the pivot point is right on where we need it to be, so that's fine. We're gonna have to do these upper chest parts and straps to get them into place. So let's turn these back on. So I've got this here so that I can move it around like this. I've got the entire chest here, so that's as high as I'm gonna go on this part. And then I've got it down here so that I can adjust it this way from down below. And I'm sure I had great reasons for that. I cannot remember why, but let's just go with it. So we're gonna manipulate our stuff as close as we can, like that. And then we're going to move down because we have to be a little bit more precise and adjust. So we do have a little bit of a size difference because they're skewed into place. And this is where we're going to make one of these decisions. So depending on how precise your show is in terms of art, right? Like right now, if I turn this back on, let me bring my transparency up so I can remove that and sort of flip. Boop. So you can see that this part here is actually getting narrower. So there are a number of options to get this to change size. I mean, I don't want to go in and put a bunch of deformers in there just so I can affect the size. To me, that's not really worth it. I'd rather put in a drawing substitution. So I animate it as close as I can. Let's bring that transparency and lock back. Because then when this is locked, you can't select it. So I'm able to select through it even though it's on top. And I'm going to put in some drawing substitutions so that it lines up properly, but it's not going to just be more deformers because that is often how things happen. Oh, these are on a clone drawing. So the line art is the left side and the color art is the right side. That's good to know. But I find a lot of people add in deformers to fix this sort of thing when you could get away with a drawing substitution, and it's not going to add a ton of weight. And it might give you a fraction of imprecision during the rotation because there's a point where the drawing substitution switches. So it's going to go from a slightly, like here you can see that's what's changing. So there's going to be a point where it goes from this to this and it's not going to be super ultra mega smooth. But if you need it to be that smooth, you can add in more drawing substitutions to in between it. But more than likely, it's not going to be a big deal because your character's moving around and doing stuff. So you just need to be intelligent about where you put that switch. And if you see something popping, correct it. Don't just leave it to be poppy and ugly. But to add in deformers every time something changes is going to weigh your character down a lot. So if you have a super mega beefcake computer that can handle all those deformers and you really think it's worth it to have that ultra smooth look, then like go to town, I guess. But to me, I feel like having an animatable rig, something that's really user friendly, is worth more than that fraction of smoothness you get from additional deformers. Cool. It's looking good. So now there's this part, which I have from the top. Again, I'm sure I had excellent reasoning for all of this. The strap. And it's another case of, like, is it worth having a deformer here in this part to get it to be ultra smooth? And again, I don't think it's going to be necessary. If it's on a moving part, like these down here, we might find that deformers are really valuable because the arm motion is very important and frequent. But I don't feel like her chest is going to be doing so much intricate stuff. Like your torso doesn't really move, like this part needs to move, so that this part needs to be cleaned up a little bit. So having that is advantageous, but I don't think I'm going to put in deformers just to make this line up a little bit better. It's too much. Too much deformers. I find the more techno geekery that gets added to Toon Boom, all these additional cool modules and like possibilities, the less people are willing to use simple solutions, and I don't think that's always the best way. I don't think more is more. Sometimes more is just, it's just laggier. It's not helping things. There we go. So let's just want to take a little peek at that here and see. So we can just tidy up this sort of stuff. And you want to get comfortable with your changing drawing tools and stuff like that. One thing that's really frustrating is the pencil editor has been replaced by the center line editor, the hotkey. So I've restored that to be the pencil editor because I don't use the center line editor very often. But you're going to want to go through and get familiar with all these tools so that you can do this sort of stuff. If you have an awkward ending to your lines, you want to be able to tidy that up quickly. So learn those hotkeys. It's super important. Now we have this one, which gets significantly longer. So if we were to put in deformers there, like, I mean, it's possible to just deform this into place, but is it better? I don't think it's better. And just stretch it out like this. And now I'm getting to a point where this is getting significantly stretched, which is not a big deal for this part. I don't think it's going to cause too much distortion here. Because sometimes your line thickness and stuff would get really distorted. Because it's so dark, I don't think it's going to cause too many problems. But this down here, this brown part, is able to bust through the chest now. So there might be some argument for tidying that up a little bit. So let's just see what's in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have part of it stay on the line layer, like that. And then we have anything we need filled up here is going to be on the line art, but anything that goes down below here that might start cutting out, you can see it has a hole in it. So it's filling over here down towards the bottom, but it's not filling over here. And so here, we're going to have it longer. We're going to make a drawing substitution here. Cut it out across the bottom here. And have any additional color art we need down there. Just to fill in those gaps. You know what? I think we might not even need the color art part. I'm just going to take all that out. Line that up. Drawing substitution. We have that. Yeah, we're on 2. And now we can adjust. So again, there's going to be a point where you have to decide where these drawings switch. But I don't think it's going to be a big deal. When people go for ultra smooth 3D looking rotations in 2D, I'm kind of like, why did you do 2D then? Why didn't you just use 3D if you wanted everything to be super smooth? Then it always would be. I don't know why they do that. I'm just a lowly effects animator. Boop. Alright. Let's see. I'm going to have to adjust that a little bit. I'm going to thin this out. And because this is my character and my art, I get to decide if I want to change it as I go. We're just going to hide this booby in here, because it's not a necessary load-bearing booby. Doot, doot, doot. We've lost our outline here. Go in and we want to make sure these joints are super tight. I don't like sloppiness on edges. We want our edges to be nice and crisp and look very intentional. And then we deal with this nonsense here. This necklace has a deformer in it because I feel like it's a place where we get a lot of bang for our buck there, and it's not a super expensive one because I want it to dangle a little bit. I want it to have that flexibility. So if this character, because she's going to have wings eventually, so if she's flying like this, then we could hang the necklace down ever so slightly, and that would be kind of nice. Whereas we wouldn't need that for the straps. The straps are going to stay pretty stationary. And then there's this. So let's see. Right, that guy. All right. Our chest is looking very caved in. So we have a couple options to figure this out. The simplest way would just be to take the part that has the art and do this, fill it in. And that, I think, might actually just work fine because the torso and chest here are not going to be competing with one another for movement. Like a shoulder, like this joint and this, like this part and this part have to kind of line up. But this part and like this whole area is not going to be animated separately. So I think that'll work fine. And I think I can just sneak this drawing substitution in so it looks a little bit nicer. Often we see envelope deformers on torsos that handle all this stuff where we get again, that ultra smooth possible transition from the front view into the 3/4 view. But that's, I mean, that's just not important to me, that ultra smooth transition. I'd rather spend the time while I'm animating just working on a fun transition and hiding any sneaky stuff I've got to put up with, but that's just me. If you want to put an envelope deformer in here, you can. And you can put the skin color on another layer. So the color art layer would be this maroon, and then say the underlay would be flesh tone. And then you could use a cutter. By this guy, you could put a cutter here so that anything outside is flesh tone. It's really a decision you can make for yourself. So here we need to bring the arm ahead. So we will bring this down, make sure I'm on this peg here, and I'm going to put 0.001. So in some of my earlier videos, I was put 0.0001, but since then I've learned that the timeline, even though your coordinates and control points menu will give you a 4-digit decimal, this only takes a 3-digit decimal. So something like this, where you're putting keyframes in, that's not going to work if you're using a 4-point decimal. It'll round up or down, and you're going to find some weirdness. Boop. And here's where we're going to have to start dealing with this shoulder. So we've got the line art here, the color art here, and what we can do is decide what we want to come above the chest and what we want to be below. Because if we just cut everything with the shoulder, so here are our shoulders and here are our arms. And we're going to grab our layer selectors. Beep. I just have the collection here I can drag down. So we're going to have to separate the upper arm. Line art is just the line. Color art is just the color. because we're going to want the lines affected separately from the color art. That's how we're going to get rid of it here. And the simplest way is to just take these shoulders and go to library and cut a move. So there you go. Just the shoulders cutting them, the line art, and we're getting this, which is an issue. Okay. So not ideal. Let's see what we have up going on in our shoulder, because our shoulder's a little bit complicated. Boop. So we've got this up here, which is why we're getting that weird hole in our arm. We've got the flesh tone down here, and then this is on just the line art. And because our shoulders have we have the maroon line, we also have the black line, because the flesh tone is using this color. And then these straps, as they move out, you can see it's bringing a black line instead. So that's something we've set up in an earlier video to save ourselves that. So what we want is just the flesh tone here to cut the line, because we don't want this overlapping gap here. This is where like an auto patch might come in. Auto patch, of course, has its own issues. I know some people who'd rather do a color art, cut line art, dupla thing. We'll use an auto patch for now, and if it's a problem, we'll fix it. We won't fix it until it's a problem. So they're the auto patch. Boop. This is now the color art being cut by the line art. That's what the auto patch does. And that's giving us a nicer line. But then when we have it come forward like this, you can see that the shoulder is cutting much more of the line than we want. So that's when we do the next step, is where we're going to put in an overlay like this of the things that we don't want to be cut. So here, we're just going to take this line here. You want that to keep existing, paste it onto our overlay layer. And now our overlay works. See, we need one back here on the back as well. So let's just grab this whole line and paste it on our overlay like that. So now when our line comes ahead, it is still being cut, but anywhere, and we can adjust this. Let's say the overlay has gone too far, so we just cut it back a little bit, or we don't want it to be super sharp, so we can taper it like this as well. Those are all options. Boop. And see, when you bring it out, that's not visible. This should be. Now, I've just noticed that the back line here on our torso is going to have to be color styled as well to match our flesh tone. So because I'm just using a drawing substitution, I'm just going to sneaky snake that in there. Later on, if I find that there's an advantage to making a super complicated torso here, then I will, but for now I don't think it's necessary. So there's of course always going to be problems when you raise the arm above the head. Looks like we need to go higher too. This is never going to look super good. I always do drawing substitutions when it looks bad. You can see we're just getting some weirdness. We're gonna want to put in some lines like this, but you can see that it's just you're gonna have to fix it when you're animating. There's no way around it. Make sure that's a 2. Yeah. Alright, lower body. I don't have a version where I've already gone through and done all this stuff, but I feel like I've done it. Because, I mean, I've got 2 different legs here. Why is that a thing? So, the lower legs and the lower arms are one place where deformers get used all the time because the shape changes very significantly. And I think arguably that's it's a pretty good spot to have a deformer. I think it does get a lot of value, especially since she's going to be doing a lot of like flying and jumping and stuff like that. So let's see, why do we have 2? Oh, I see, one has an overlay. So when I switch it, I gotcha. I see what I did there. So let's use an envelope deformer. And because we're using an envelope deformer, you have to remember when you make a deformer, you have a choice of whether you're going to do this, hit this button here, and get a transformation switch so you can add additional deformers for different drawing substitutions. But because this lower leg, both the drawings are exactly the same. They just, one has a roundy bit and one doesn't. Let's deactivate these. And our... because they're exactly the same shape, there's no advantage to doing that at this time. So I just won't. I'm going to make sure my envelope deformer's on. And I'm going to be very careful about making my deformer along the outside edge, because if you do a lazy deformer that is trash like this, like it's not lined up, and they get a bunch of errors because the art is cracking and stuff like that, like don't even bother putting deformers in there if you're not going to do a good job. I hate when I get deformers and they are like just sloppily shoved in like this. I'm like, why did you bother? I could put it in myself if you're not going to do the work. So if you're a rigger, to put it in correctly, the reason you do the ultra tedious job of all of this stuff ahead of time is so animators don't have to do it, because they'll probably end up fixing it in dozens and dozens of scenes, but you only had to do it one time. So have the patience to do it all properly. I think I'm going to put one here, and then I'm going to do the other side. Now, some places will do duplicates. They'll just do one leg and then they'll duplicate it on the other side. But I don't like to do that. I don't like to put animation on things that don't need it. But there's nothing wrong with it. If your character is perfectly symmetrical and you want to save time by doing it that way, that's a good idea. So now, because we didn't put in the transformation switch, if we look inside our deformer group, we just have our curves lined up in a row. It's good to note that you can add one later. That one's in the other group. Boop. See? It has added a transform switch, and now those chain of curves has been created in group 1 on transform switch number 1. This is 0, 1, 2. Boop, boop, boop. We can undo it, and then we've just got our curves back. So just by saying you don't want a transform switch before doesn't mean you can't add one in later, and you can still do it just as quickly by pressing the button. It'll create your groups. Blah, blah, blah. And then when you create your next deformer, it's going to create the chain here on this guy, on group number 2. So that's good to do. That is nice. I like that you have the option of changing it later. Because maybe I find out that I've made a horrible mistake. Alright, the upper legs, again, you have the choice of putting in deformers if you want to. I don't feel like the upper legs change shape nearly as much as the lower legs do. They're very just cylindrical. They just like a straight taper, but here I have like faux calves happening. So as I turn and I grab my hips, move them into place where they need to be. Move. I went back and checked my videos to see if I'd done this already, and I haven't. I just wish I had. Dear Tracy from the past, please rig this character in full, because I don't want to do it now. I just want to have it. I just want to have it done forever. So I'm going to go through and do these legs. And because the legs are simple, so I'm just going to do those now. And then I'll go back to the torso that I was doing. You know what? I usually don't like adding lots of deformers in the legs, but I do want her to have a nice butt. Yeah, so I'm going to do something I usually just mouse about, which is adding more deformers. Dude. Oh, see, I didn't peg this. Peg it. Keyframe before I did it, so now I have this weird swollen front leg. Beep. So because the front is the 0, I can just reset everything when it's on the 0 frame, and it does happy things, which I like. So let's deactivate those. We've brought this guy over, and let's put in... So the upper leg, we're gonna put in the envelope deformer. Again, I don't think I'm going to need a transform switch for these. Boop. And after I finish the legs, I'll cut this video and I will call it a day. And then I will put the next half in the next video because I don't like editing more than an hour at a time. Those jumps I did, if anybody watched those, the last 2 videos I posted, the actual record time was over 2 hours. So when you're editing 2 hours down, it takes at least 2 hours if it was perfect, because you have to watch 2 hours worth of footage and then decide what you're going to cut out and stuff. So it took a long time to edit that. So now I'm going to make a better effort of keeping my stuff a little bit more succinct. So I've gone counterclockwise on these. I don't think that matters. There might be somebody out there who's like, why aren't you going symmetrically with one is where you're always going outwards towards the outside of the leg or something on your deformers? That I don't think matters. There's no advantage, especially with envelope deformers. If you're not using an envelope deformer, your initial offset, oh, this is happening. So if you go in here, your first one is called an offset. And if you don't use an envelope deformer, that guy here can't move independently. So then it's very important where you put your root. But with envelope deformers, because you can move all of them, they're so much easier to deal with. I like to put my offset still like the place where it's least important, like under here is where it's under her skirt. But it really doesn't matter. You can put the offset down on her kneecaps and it wouldn't matter. And now, because I didn't use a transform switch, I can go back and both my drawings are going to be able to utilize this. And I'm going to give her shapely legs. So if you have a stick man, like Blue, his legs are just twigs. They're just rectangles. So you don't need a ton of deformers on rectangle legs. I think it looks bad. But here where you have very shapely legs, there's an advantage here. Just remember, if you are manipulating things with deformers like this, you're gonna mess up your pivot points if you move the parts that turn on the pivot. So you don't want to like move your kneecap around. You want to try and keep this circle pretty intact, or else you're going to cause yourself problems down the line. So don't muck about. Try and muck about as little as you can in this part. There might be places where you need to do it, but just do your best. On elaborate legs, I like to set up the pivot points like I did with these shoulders and the neck. But because these legs are fairly simple, like they're just green legs, there's no texture, there's not a lot of buckles or details or designs, so keeping these pivot points is not going to be too difficult. And like I said, this under here, if this was like a pair of jeans where you had to make sure everything was lining up just the way it needed to, then you'd have to make sure your hip rotation was exactly where it needed to be. But this one is hidden, so you have some leeway there. So I'm going to rotate it back until my knee joint is where the knee goes. And then I'm going to rotate this closer to where it needs to go. And then I'm going to use my deformers. I'm not going to start with deformers because then I'm going to mess up my pivot points. And then I'm going to try and move this as little as possible. I want to get the same art that I have here, but I don't want to muck about with my pivot points. Pivot points are important, so. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these legs, your 3/4 front legs. I'm going to move them over to the 3/4 back legs. And then I'm just going to take the back leg and move it over here. And I'm going to take the front leg. And remember, always keep track of what you're doing. I'm using the topmost peg here in the leg hierarchy. And I'm just going to adjust them because you want the shape to be the same. So now let's make sure that the left leg stays on the left. That's important. Sometimes it's flippable, sometimes it's not. Make sure your leg stays on the same side or you're going to have problems. Again, Forgot to keyframe the boober, but I can, right leg staying on the right. That's super important. So now we're actually going to switch these legs, which seems bananas, but we want the leg to stay on the same side, like that. Alright, so we've gotten to the point where the legs are going around. Let me just deactivate this. So this is our right leg. Boop. Right leg's coming around. And now the right leg has to be in the back. So we have an option of bringing this guy forward, but that means we have to bring the skirt forward and this forward, forward, forward. Or we can bring this leg back. So at this point, that seems easier to me. So 0.001, B for back, and it's going to push it back. And then fit it in with the deformers. La 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 la, there's repetitive tasks. So fun to record and watch, I bet you're riveted. Alright, so let's just test our legs here. We're going to copy all our frames and just give them a few in-betweens. Boop, 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 boop. And we will test. Meow. Oh, looks okay. Feel like it's a little bit... This part here is not super duper great, but it's fine. I think that's fine. You don't, like I said, you don't need the super smoothest. Like this from here to here is not... Why don't I like that one? I think this one just gets very straight. Because it's going back towards this one. Let me see. Yeah, so I think this is working as well as I want it to. You can see by starting at the top of the hierarchy, making sure your pivot points stay where they belong, and then working down to deformers later. Oh, we gotta get this working, obviously. This little is just kind of rotating around her leg into her inner thigh. So that'll be our next step. We'll get that working. We'll get those feet on. Then we'll go back to the torso, because that's where the real difficult stuff is starting to lie, is in that torso. Whee! Alright, so this is it for this one. Thanks for dropping by. Like, share, subscribe, all those things internet people ask you to do, and I will see you in the next video.